The morning shift at the Riverdale Police Department always started the same. The smell of burnt coffee, the buzzing of old fluorescent lights, and the chatter of men who thought their voices meant something. I pushed my mop bucket through the hallway like I'd done for months. Quietly, steadily, unseen. That's the secret to blending in. Be useful enough to stay, invisible enough not to matter. They never asked my name. Never looked twice. To them, I was the janitor. The man who cleaned up after their mistakes. Maybe that's why no one noticed when I stopped by the evidence room that morning, or when I paused near Captain Reeves's office where the shouting started, "Get him out of my sight!" Reeves's voice thundered, rough and certain. Two young officers dragged a man inside, handcuffed, bleeding, shaking with rage. The kid couldn't have been older than 20. "It's my car," he shouted. "I got the registration right there." One of the officers laughed. "Yeah, sure, and I'm the mayor." They pushed him into a chair, hard. I kept sweeping. That's what they expected of me, the quiet man with the broom. But my eyes caught the file on Reeves's desk. A familiar case number. The same stolen vehicle report I'd seen logged at 2 a.m. the night before. I knew that plate. I knew that car. Because it belonged to Detective Miles. Undercover, off-duty, and still on the system as active. Which meant the kid was telling the truth. Reeves slammed his coffee down, spilling some on the paperwork. Another thief crying innocence. He grabbed a pen, ready to sign the arrest form. I stepped closer, pretending to clean the spill. "You might want to check that report before you ruin another life," I said quietly. He turned sharply. "Excuse me?" His tone carried the weight of rank, but not of wisdom. "That car," I said, keeping my voice calm, "belongs to one of ours. Miles reported it stolen hours before you brought him in. The dispatcher confirmed it." The room went silent. The two officers glanced at each other. Reeves's face shifted from irritation to disbelief. "And how the hell would you know that?" I straightened up, looking him in the eye. "Because I was there. And because I used to write those reports before you got promoted." He froze, eyes narrowing, piecing together the words like a puzzle he didn't want solved. "Yeah," I said, finishing for him. "I used to be one of you." The younger officer blinked. "Wait, you're a cop?" "Was," I corrected. "Now I just clean up what's left behind." Reeves scoffed. "Then stay in your lane, janitor." His voice cracked on that last word, but he pretended not to notice. A minute later, Monroe, the only one in the room with sense, rushed in, holding a phone. "Captain," she said out of breath, "dispatch just confirmed. The vehicle was registered to Detective Miles. The arrest is bad." Reeves's eyes darted to me, then to the kid. The silence that followed was heavier than any apology. The kid looked at me, confused but relieved. I nodded once, the kind of nod that says, "You're free now, but don't gloat." The cuffs came off. Reeves muttered something about a misunderstanding. I didn't bother to correct him. When I turned to leave, Monroe stopped me. "Sir, what did you say your name was again?" I met her eyes. "Cole. Darius Cole." She frowned, the name echoing in her memory. "As in Chief Cole?" I gave a small smile. "That's what the mayor calls me. But for now, janitor works fine." The room froze. Reeves's pen fell to the desk. The young officers stood stiff. And in that silence, the kind that cuts deeper than words, I picked up my mop and walked out. Because sometimes the best way to teach respect is to make them clean up their own mess. The next morning, the air in the station felt heavier. Conversations died when I entered a room. Chairs scraped quieter. Even the coffee pot stopped gurgling when I passed by. I could feel the weight of yesterday hanging over every badge in the building. It's funny how quickly people remember manners once they realize who's watching. I spent the first hour in silence, reviewing the reports on my desk. Old habits die hard. Even after years away, I still preferred the rhythm of paperwork to the noise of ego. Files never lied, people did. And this station had been built on both. Captain Monroe came in just before 9. She carried 2 cups of coffee and a folder marked Internal Review. "Chief," she said softly, "about what happened yesterday." "We don't talk about it," I interrupted. "We fix it." She nodded, slid the folder across my desk. "Then you'll want to see this." Inside were 3 complaints. All dismissed. All filed by civilians against the same 2 officers who arrested that boy. Every report stamped unsubstantiated. I knew what that meant. I'd seen it before, complaints buried under favors and signatures. I closed the folder, leaned back. Who signed these? Monroe hesitated. Captain Reeves, of course he did. I could almost hear his laugh echoing in the hall, the same smug sound that used to fill briefing rooms when I was a detective here. Back then, I'd spoken up once about a false report. 3 days later, my transfer request was approved. That was the first lesson this place ever taught me. In Riverdale, truth is paperwork. And paperwork can disappear. Pull everything tied to these cases, I said. Body cam footage, witness lists, even parking logs. I want it all. Monroe frowned. Chief, if you do that, Reeves will... He'll know I'm not here to play janitor anymore, I said, standing. It's time he learned what clean really means. We spent the rest of the day digging. The deeper we went, the worse it got. Reports altered, timestamps missing, entire videos lost. It wasn't incompetence. It was a system, a quiet machine built to erase mistakes before anyone could see them. And it had been running smoothly for years. By sunset, Monroe looked exhausted. She rubbed her temples, whispering, "How many lives did they ruin just to protect each other?" I didn't answer. The truth would crush her soon enough. Instead, I pulled out an old leather-bound notebook from my drawer. My notebook. Every night before I resigned, I'd copied down the case numbers I wasn't supposed to see. I slid it toward her. Start here. Her eyes widened. You've been keeping this all along? Someone had to, I said. Justice isn't about revenge, Captain. It's about memory. We stayed late. The station emptied out, lights dimming one by one until it was just the two of us and the hum of the overhead bulbs. I stared at the whiteboard where we'd mapped the connections, names, dates, missing reports. In the center, I circled one name in red, Walter Kane, police commissioner. Monroe's voice dropped. He's untouchable. No one's untouchable, I said quietly. Some people are just harder to reach. The hallway clock struck midnight. I stood, grabbed my coat, and looked out the window at the rain beginning to fall. Raindrops tapped the glass like old secrets trying to get in. Tomorrow, I said, we start cleaning for real. As I walked out, the janitor's closet light flickered, the same one I'd used all those months to stay invisible. Now I smiled at it. There's a strange power in being underestimated. It gives you time to watch. And time is all I ever needed. The next day began before sunrise. The station's parking lot was still dark, slick from rain, reflecting red and blue lights that weren't flashing for anyone in particular, just the ghosts of authority. I stood there for a moment, breathing in the cold air, the smell of wet asphalt and burned coffee drifting from the break room vents. It was going to be a long day. By the time I walked into my office, Monroe had already pinned everything we'd found on the board. Case numbers, missing files, crossed out names. In the middle, one photo circled in red. Commissioner Walter Kane. He wasn't just the name behind the cover-ups. He was the wall between truth and the people who needed it. Monroe turned when she heard me. Chief, she said, if you go after him, the entire department will push back. I gave her a small nod. Then maybe it's time someone pushed harder. She didn't smile. She'd been around long enough to know the cost of idealism. At 9 a.m., I called for a departmental meeting. Every officer, every captain, every detective, mandatory attendance. Reeves walked in last, still carrying that smirk that didn't quite fit the man wearing it. What's this about, Chief? He asked, his tone pretending to be casual. A seminar on mopping technique? A few officers laughed under their breath. I let them. Mockery is a cheap armor. It cracks fast. I stepped to the front, clicked the remote, and the projector lit up. On screen appeared a paused body cam frame, an officer's gloved hand striking a civilian. The room fell silent. Then I hit play. Voices filled the space. The same two officers from the wrongful arrest, laughing as they cuffed a man, falsifying details in their report. Reeves' smile vanished. These recordings were never filed, I said, voice calm, steady. They were deleted from the system within 2 hours. But they weren't gone. I looked straight at Reeves. Nothing really disappears. It just hides behind people who think no one's looking. Someone shifted uncomfortably. The projector's glow painted the room in cold blue. Chief, Reeves said, clearing his throat, you can't just... Actually, I interrupted, I can, and I will. I pulled another file from the desk. 3 more complaints, stamped unsubstantiated. Do you know what happens when leadership protects lies, Captain? You don't just lose integrity, you lose control. He tried to speak again, but the sound that came out wasn't confidence anymore. It was panic wrapped in pride. You're making enemies you don't need. I'm cleaning the house I was hired to live in, I said, and I don't mind sweeping hard. Monroe stood by the door, arms crossed, watching quietly. She'd seen power collapse before. It never happened with shouting, just silence and realization. I switched the slide again. This time, the footage was from a hidden pen camera. The timestamp read yesterday. Reeves's eyes widened. The video showed him shouting orders, forcing a false confession from a witness. My voice didn't rise, but it hit like thunder. Every chief before me pretended not to see this. I'm not every chief. When the video ended, I turned the lights back on. The silence that followed was so sharp you could hear the rain outside. Effective immediately, I said. Captain Reeves is placed on suspension pending investigation. Officer Daniels and Hayes are removed from field duty. Their badges will be returned when they remember what they stand for. Reeves stepped forward. You can't do this. I just did. He stared at me for a long moment, then laughed once. Short, bitter. You think this makes you a hero? No, I said. It makes me accountable. He stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. A few officers glanced at me, half expecting anger, but I just turned back to the board. Justice isn't loud, I said softly. It just takes time to be heard. Monroe waited until the room emptied, then spoke. You know Kane's going to come for you after this? I nodded. He can try. Outside, thunder rolled again, distant but coming closer. It always does right before the storm breaks. That night, as I locked my office, I noticed something slipped under the door. An envelope with no name. Inside was a single flash drive and a note written in block letters. You were right. Check the commissioner's accounts. The storm had officially begun. By morning, Riverdale was different. The news hadn't broken yet, but whispers traveled faster than headlines. Everyone at the station knew something had shifted. They just didn't know how deep the crack ran. The hallways felt tighter, colder, like the building itself was holding its breath. That's what corruption does. It makes even silence sound dangerous. I sat alone in my office, the flash drive still lying on the desk. No label, no clue who sent it. Just that one line. You were right. Monroe walked in quietly, 2 coffees in hand. She set one down and looked at the drive like it might explode. You think it's real? She asked. We'll know soon enough, I said. I plugged it in. The screen lit up, loading folder after folder. Transaction logs, wire transfers, ghost accounts. Every line traced back to one name, Commissioner Walter Kane. Monroe leaned in. He's laundering money through city contracts. Not just contracts, I said. Look, the payoffs, the bonuses, the equipment orders that never existed. He's been funding something off the books. Her face paled. The Blue Circle, the name wasn't new. I'd heard it before, back when I was still wearing the badge. A tight-knit group of officers who believed law only mattered when it worked for them. They'd protected each other, covered for each other, and when someone got in their way, they buried them in procedure. I thought I'd left them behind. Turns out I'd just been cleaning their mess from the other side of the mop. At noon, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. You should have stayed retired. Stop digging, I showed Monroe. She frowned. They're watching you. I smiled faintly. Good. Let them see what justice looks like when it doesn't blink. We spent the next hours compiling evidence, encrypting copies, documenting every detail. By 3 o'clock, we had enough to bury Kane's career, maybe even his freedom. But power doesn't fall quietly. When I stepped outside for air, a black sedan was parked across the street. Engine running, no plates. The window rolled down just enough for me to see a camera flash. Then it drove off. By evening, the phone in my office rang. A voice on the other end, low, smooth, calculated. Chief Cole, it said, this is Commissioner Kane. I hear you've been curious. Curiosity keeps me sharp, I replied. Then let me give you some advice, he said. Sharp things have a way of cutting their owners. He paused. Walk away, Cole. You've already got your story, your little redemption arc. Don't make this ugly. I leaned back, eyes on the rain sliding down the window. You know what's ugly, Commissioner? Watching men in uniform forget what those uniforms mean. Watching a system rot from the inside while good people look away. Silence. Then a quiet chuckle. You always were self-righteous. That's why they pushed you out. Don't make me remind you how easy it is to make someone disappear twice. Click. Line dead. Monroe stood in the doorway. He called, didn't he? He warned me, I said. Which means we're close. That night, I drove home slower than usual, every headlight in the mirror feeling like a target. When I pulled into the driveway, the porch light was off. My wife Lena always left it on. Inside, everything looked normal, until I saw the envelope on the kitchen table. No name, no note, just a photo. My daughter Mia, walking home from school. My hands tightened. There's a specific kind of rage that doesn't shout. It freezes. I picked up the photo, flipped it over. On the back, one word, stop. For a long moment, I just stood there, breathing. Then I pulled out my phone and called Monroe. They've made it personal, I said. Her voice was steady. So what do? We finish it, I replied. But this time we do it in the open. By midnight, I was back at the station. I opened a secure laptop, uploaded everything, the accounts, the transfers, the cover-ups, and scheduled it for public release. A simple timer. Noon tomorrow. If anything happened to me, the world would know. When I closed the laptop, I caught my reflection in the window. Tired eyes, steady hands. For a second, I saw the janitor again, the man they thought was invisible. But invisible men see everything. Outside, thunder rolled low across the city. The storm wasn't coming. It was already here. By dawn, the rain had turned to fog, the kind that clings to the streetlights and hides more than it reveals. I hadn't slept, not really. You can't, when you know what's waiting in daylight. The timer on my laptop blinked quietly in the corner of my desk. 11:58 a.m., 2 minutes before everything went public. All the files, all the evidence, every hidden dollar that Commissioner Kane thought he'd buried. I took one last sip of cold coffee and whispered to myself, let's clean this up properly. The office phone rang. Monroe's voice came through, urgent. Chief, they're moving. 3 unmarked vehicles just left City Hall. They're heading your way. Then it's too late for them, I said. She hesitated. Cole, what if this doesn't end well? I smiled faintly. It never does for people who start the mess. At exactly noon, the screen flashed green. Upload complete. For a second, the silence was perfect. Then the city erupted. Phones buzzing, news alerts popping, reporters calling. Somewhere across town, Kane's empire was cracking in real time. I was still staring at the screen when the lights flickered. Then died, power out. The hum of the air conditioning stopped, replaced by the sound of footsteps in the hallway. 3 sets, slow, measured, confident. I didn't move, just waited. The door opened. Reeves stepped in first, uniform pressed, jaw tight, eyes full of regret he didn't want to name. Behind him were 2 officers I didn't recognize. Chief, Reeves said quietly, you made a lot of noise today. And yet, I said, you still came to listen. He didn't smile. They sent us to bring you in. They? I asked, leaning back in my chair. You mean Kane? He didn't answer, but his silence told the truth. I stood, slow, deliberate. Before you do something you can't undo, tell me one thing, Reeves. When did doing your job become taking orders from a criminal? His jaw tightened. You don't understand. No, I interrupted. You don't. You think you're protecting the department, but all you're doing is burying it deeper. For a second, no one moved. Then the younger of the 2 officers spoke. Sir, maybe we should hear him out. Reeves glared at him, but something cracked behind that stare. Conscience, maybe. Fear, definitely. I walked to the window, pulled the blinds open. Outside, news vans were already parked across the street, cameras pointed at the building. See that? I said. You can drag me out in cuffs if you want, but they'll see it. Everyone will. You can't hide behind walls anymore. Reeves's shoulders dropped. He looked older, smaller somehow. What do you want, Cole? The truth, I said simply. No spin, no politics, no cover-ups. Just truth, for once. He stared at me for a long moment, then nodded. Kane's already gone to ground. You'll never get him. Maybe not, I said. But everyone else will. He sighed, gestured for the others to lower their weapons. You're still making a mistake. Maybe, I said. But at least it's mine. The backup generators kicked in then, humming back to life. The lights flickered on, and with them, the faint echo of sirens outside. Reeves turned toward the sound. FBI, I said. They're here for him, not for me. Monroe burst through the door a moment later, holding her phone. It's out, Chief. Every network's running the story. The governor's calling for Kane's arrest. She looked at Reeves, then at me. It's over. But it wasn't. Not yet. Because truth doesn't end things. It starts the next fight. Reeves took off his cap, ran a hand through his hair. You know, for what it's worth, I didn't want it to come to this. It always comes to this, I said. That's how corruption works. It waits for silence. He nodded once, then walked out. No handcuffs, no shouting. Just a man who finally saw the cracks in the badge he'd polished for too long. Monroe stepped closer. What now? Now? I said, turning toward the window. Now we see who's brave enough to stand in daylight. Outside, the fog was beginning to lift. The rain had stopped, but the streets still shimmered, reflecting the flashing lights of the cars pulling up. I watched as Kane was led out of City Hall on live television, his perfect suit soaked, his hands cuffed behind his back. For the first time in years, the city felt quiet, not the kind of quiet that hides things, but the kind that breathes. Monroe exhaled. You really think it's over? I smiled faintly. Justice doesn't end, Captain. It just changes shifts. She laughed, tired, relieved, human. And for the first time in a long while, I let myself laugh too. The storm had done its work. Now all that was left was cleanup. The next morning, the whole city was awake before the sun. News helicopters hovered over downtown like restless birds, broadcasting live from every angle of Kane's arrest. Headlines screamed about corruption, racism, abuse of power, the kind of words that had always existed in whispers but never in ink. This time there was no hiding. Riverdale was exposed, raw and naked, under the light of its own shame. I arrived at the station before most of the others. The same officers who used to look through me now stood up straighter when I passed. Some out of respect, some out of fear. Either way, I didn't need either. I just needed the truth to stay louder than the noise. In my office, Monroe was already waiting. She had dark circles under her eyes, a coffee in each hand, and the kind of expression you only see on people who've seen too much, but still believe it can change. You didn't sleep, I said. She smirked. Neither did you, I nodded. Kane? In custody. He's not saying a word. His lawyers are already circling like vultures. I walked to the window, watching the crowd of reporters outside the building. They'll paint him as a scapegoat, I said. A victim of politics. But you can't call it a witch hunt when the whole coven's on camera. Monroe exhaled, almost laughing. You really think this city can heal after all this? It has to, I said. Or all this means nothing. At noon, the department held an internal hearing, part formality, part theater. The press wasn't allowed inside, but the tension outside was thick enough to choke on. Every officer in the building showed up. Some came for justice. Others came to make sure their names didn't end up on the next report. I stood at the front of the room. Reeves sat in the back, head bowed. I nodded to him once. No anger left, just understanding. We were both tired of pretending the badge made us better than the people we swore to protect. The district attorney arrived with files, statements, and a voice that didn't tremble. She read out the charges: embezzlement, obstruction, conspiracy. Each word landed like a gavel, echoing off the walls. I watched faces harden, soften, break. Some officers shifted in their seats. Others stared straight ahead, refusing to look at me. When she finished, the room fell silent. I stepped forward, not as their chief, not even as their leader, just as a man who'd been both victim and witness. This department lost its way, I began. We stopped asking what was right and started asking what was convenient. Somewhere along the line, we forgot that power isn't protection. It's responsibility. And we buried truth under paperwork until it suffocated. I looked around the room. No more. We clean this from the inside, or we don't call ourselves officers. We serve people, not each other's pride. Someone in the back started to clap. Slowly, the sound grew, uneven, hesitant, then steady. For a moment, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like confession. Afterward, Monroe found me in the hallway. "You think they'll actually change?" she asked. "Maybe not all of them," I said. "But enough to matter." We walked outside together. The air felt different, lighter, like the city had finally exhaled. Across the street, protesters held signs that read, "Justice for all" and "Clean the badge." For once, no one was shouting at the police. They were shouting with them. Later that evening, I visited the holding cell where Kane was kept. He looked smaller without the suit, older without the arrogance. He smirked when he saw me. "Enjoying your moment?" he said. I leaned against the bars. "This isn't a moment, Walter. It's a beginning." He chuckled dryly. "You really think this will change anything? Another chief comes, another system stays the same." I met his eyes. "Maybe, but not this time. Not while I'm still breathing." He leaned back, smirk fading. "You're naive, Cole." "No," I said. "Just tired of cleaning the same dirt." When I left the cell, the corridor was empty. The fluorescent lights hummed softly, steady and cold. For the first time, they didn't feel oppressive. They felt honest. Outside, the sun was setting over Riverdale, gold light spilling across the wet streets, turning the city into something almost beautiful again. Monroe stood by the steps, watching the crowd disperse. "Long day," she said. "Justice always takes the long way around," I replied. She smiled, faint but real. "What now? Now?" I looked out at the horizon, where the light was still fighting through the clouds. "Now we make sure it doesn't fade." And for the first time in a long time, I believed it might not. The storm had passed, but the echoes stayed. News anchors called it the largest internal cleanup in Riverdale history. The public called it justice. I didn't call it anything. Justice doesn't need applause. It just needs to last. A week after the hearing, the station looked almost normal again. New paint on the walls, new officers walking the halls, and for the first time in years, no shouting behind closed doors. But silence can be heavy too. It carries what people don't say out loud. I came in early, as always. The smell of fresh coffee had replaced burnt nerves. Files were stacked neatly on desks. The bulletin board, once covered in complaints, was now clean. Not because the problems were gone, but because we finally had the courage to face them one by one. Reeves showed up just after 7. No badge on his chest, just a plain shirt and tired eyes. He stopped by my office, knocked once, and said quietly, "Chief." I gestured to the chair. "You don't have to call me that." "Force of habit," he said, sitting down. We stayed quiet for a while. Two men with too many ghosts and not enough words. Then he said, "I turned in my resignation. I figured you'd prefer it that way." I studied him for a moment. "I didn't ask for it." "I know," he said. "But some things you do because it's right, not because someone tells you." He stood to leave, but I stopped him. "Reeves." He turned, and for the first time since I'd known him, I saw something that looked like peace. "You ever think about coming back?" I asked. He blinked, surprised. "After all this?" "Maybe not as a captain," I said. "But maybe as a man who remembers what the job's supposed to be." He smiled faintly, shook his head. "You always were the optimist." "No," I said. "Just stubborn enough to try again." He chuckled softly, extended his hand. "For what it's worth, Chief." "I'm sorry." I took his hand. "Don't be sorry. Be better." When he left, I noticed the mop leaning against the corner of my office, the same one from my first day. I kept it there, not as a reminder of humiliation, but of perspective. Power cleans nothing if you forget where dirt hides. Later that morning, Monroe walked in with the weekly reports. "It's quiet today," she said. "Almost too quiet," I smiled. "That's how you know we're making progress." She placed the file on my desk and lingered. "You think they'll remember all this a year from now?" "Maybe not," I said. "But the ones who matter will." We stepped outside for a moment. The city looked different now. Same skyline, same sirens in the distance, but the tension in the air had thinned. Across the street, kids were walking to school. A bus driver waved to an officer. People were still cautious, but cautious hope is better than none. Monroe glanced at me. "You ever regret coming back?" I thought about it. The nights of doubt, the threats, The faces that looked through me until they couldn't anymore. "No," I said finally. "You can't fix something from the outside. Sometimes you have to step into the mess to remind everyone what clean looks like." As we walked back in, I caught a reflection in the glass door. Not the janitor I once pretended to be, but not the chief people now saw either. Just a man who'd learned that power without empathy is just noise. By noon, the station buzzed again, phones ringing, officers moving, life returning. I sat at my desk, opened my notebook, and wrote one line under the date. Justice isn't a storm that passes. It's the quiet that stays after. I closed the book, leaned back, and for the first time since everything began, let myself breathe. Outside, the sunlight broke through the clouds, faint, steady, warm. The same light that used to expose everything wrong with this city now made it look alive again. Maybe that's what justice really is. Not revenge, not headlines, not applause, just light finding its way back through the cracks.